Hello, I'm Tom Stapledon, and I'm back again once more with another one of my talks on behalf of the Friends of Williamson's Tunnels. Um, this time, I'm going to try and get it across to some of our followers who have been seeing little or no progress by way of any digging or excavation or discoveries for quite some time. And a lot of people are getting frustrated at the lack of progress, as we volunteers certainly are. But I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the things that are still going on in the background, even though we're not actually digging anything out. We have been working quite hard and doing an awful lot of thinking, uh, to be ready for the time when we can actually start excavating. So this time it's entitled The Search for New Tunnels Following the Army Plans. Now, I have talked many times in previous talks and slideshows about the Army plans that we have been following. And this, our own Friends of Williamson's Tunnels tunnel plan has been evolving over a number of years. It looks very cluttered, quite difficult to follow. It's superimposed onto a small piece of an Ordnance Survey plan of our bit of Edge Hill in Liverpool. And it depicts certainly the three yellow areas, which are open, accessible, and being used extensively. We do tours of our two sites, the Williamson House site here on Mason Street and the Paddington Cellars up the street there. And the other one, as you may or may not know, is run by another organization altogether, the Joseph Williamson Society. So everything we've got on here has been based to start off with on a plan drawn up by the Territorial Army, who in the 1870s, I would think, onwards, occupied many of the buildings in and around Mason Street, which is where we are here, the next street up, Highgate Street. And they occupied lots of Williamson's own properties after his death. They used them for all sorts of purposes. There were barracks, they had parade grounds, they had armories, they had drill holes, and they had all this kind of thing. And they were very busy. They moved backwards and forwards between different properties over the years. I know of the Royal Engineers, Royal Corps of Signals, various other groups that were based in this area. And it's a plan drawn up by the Territorials, which we think goes back to about 1880, which is the basis for all our building on with this particular plan in front of you. The dark blue areas are tunnels that we know exist, we have discovered. The orangey ones we're almost certain exist. These in pale blue and green, a little bit more, well, definitely unproven. Various site surveys have pointed to the fact that there may be tunnels there, but I'm not so sure I believe them. But we have come to believe that the Army plan was actually very accurate. Now we have a number of copies of this Army plan. I honestly don't know where they all originate from. They've materialized out of thin air over many years. People find things in archives and have them sent to them and don't know where they came from. This particular one looks very, very scruffy. It's obviously been photocopied multiple times in earlier days when photocopying wasn't very good. It does have 1880 written up there in pen, and it isn't. This plan definitely does not date from the 1880s. I can tell you that because this is our plot here, the Williamson House site. Next door, we have there, as you can plainly see, I hope, a big building marked Drill Hall. Well, that Territorial Army Drill Hall, as I've mentioned before in my talks, wasn't built until between 1900 and 1903. The Territorials occupied some Williamson buildings there for many years, but then they finally knocked them down in 1900 and put up their drill hall. And so this has to date from after 1903. It's basically the same plan as before. And the major tunnels that we're aware of, we've got our banqueting hall here. Hopefully the Great Tunnel under the land next door and where the magnet factory stood. The triple-decker tunnel here. Tunnels running across to the land next door, and a big one here. Tunnel going under the street even, and more on the other side of the street. We've proved that more and more of this is actually real and accurate. Now here's a very cleaned up version of the same basic plan. Williamson house site here. And we used the Army plan back in 2019 when the Merseyflex factory was demolished and we got permission to have a dig. We used it to locate this chamber here. We went straight to it. We found the tunnel under the road. And without that, we would never have been digging there. But the Army plan did it for us. This is actually copied from an earlier version because this shows the series of Williamson buildings on the land next door on the magnet joinery factory site. I know this is it. It had this crescent-shaped drive out the front. So that goes back to before 1900 and we presume about 1880. But the first one I showed you definitely is a later version of it. This one here shows the same section of the tunnels superimposed on a plan of Mason Street, railway cutting running through here. And this shows outlined in green the Williamson house site. Outlined in blue, not so easy to see here, is the magnet joinery factory site where we hope the Great Tunnel lies. And the red triangle lying against the railway cutting is that one there. And this was the chamber we actually located very accurately using the Army plan. So it's become more and more believable as time has gone on, even though some things still seem rather unlikely to be there or unlikely to be true. We're coming to believe it more and more. So in September 2019, we got permission to go onto the Merseyflex site here and have an explore to see if we could find that tunnel. On the very first day of the dig, Monday morning, we unearthed that tunnel disappearing underneath Mason Street there. We went straight to a point, dug out this area, which turned out to be a basement corridor underneath one of Williamson's former houses. It would be underneath number 50 or 52, or partially under each. And this passage is quite obviously a basement room, and it leads to this point here. The fence on Mason Street is right there. And so this tunnel looks like only half a tunnel, but the other half is there, I think. It's just a wall is obscuring it there. Completely filled up with rubble, but still intact by the look of it. And there's no sagging in the, or depressions in the road, even though really big wagons used to go over it. So hopefully it's still strong. Leading across to hopefully a pair of tunnels leading off in two different directions on the other side of the road, but that we haven't discovered. So there's a close-up of it looking into that open mouth of this little tunnel that runs across the street. This would be a good 6 foot high, I would think, good enough for somebody to walk through to the basement of a building on the other side of the street. Digging a little bit further backwards away from the road in this trench, we found evidence of a nice tiled floor, which made it quite plain that this was part of the basement underneath the Williamson houses. And this was at about 2.5 meters below the ground level, which is about what you would expect, I suppose. There's a photo looking at the same area when we've opened up a bit more. It turned out to be several different rooms with walls across, and there were windows. We didn't actually see any doorways, but they would be underneath the concrete here. And there's the tunnel disappearing under the pavement. And on the second day, we decided to cut a channel across at 90 degrees, right across there, which we hoped would go across the top of this chamber that we were hoping to find, a rather large chamber. So big success on the first day. And the second day was just as brilliant. We were down here at about 4 meters, digging at right angles to that first cut, and we unearthed, by absolute sheer chance, a small hole in the roof of this chamber, a little way down from the top of the arched brick arched roof. But it wasn't even big enough to squeeze in through until we knocked a few bits of brick out and opened the hole out slightly. I've explained how we found this and got into it several times before, but it's worth going over again because the reason we found it was entirely down to the Army plans. Now, once we got inside, of course, we found this wonderful chamber. Looking from somewhere around halfway along it, we're looking now towards the road, Mason Street. And then when we look in the opposite direction, towards the rear of the site, there's the rear wall, solid sandstone wall at each end. This has been excavated straight out of the raw sandstone, and it's about 13 meters long, 13.3 meters long, and getting on for about 7 meters wide, although we couldn't measure that precisely. And from this point where the photographer is, you can just see the hole where we broke in with the daylight coming in. Almost completely filled to the roof with this sandstone waste material, just enough space to crawl over the top from end to end, which was clear end to end, but it was on your belly job for a lot of the time, or hands and knees in a few bits where it wasn't quite so high. Something rather interesting towards the rear there, solid sandstone wall at each end, but there's just this little cutout here. Something has been cut out of that rear wall, and then a series of quite large blocks of stone have been inserted, and something more underneath it. I can't remember whether that was more stone or whether that's brick below, but it leads to something that we'd like to get back in and investigate. Now, again, I've explained this before, but directly across the street from this chamber, across the other side of Mason Street, there was a set of buildings here. These are council flats, sorry, council houses in a fairly long row. And on the end of this row, on the corner of Mason Street and Shimmin Street, were 3 houses, this pair, and another one slightly further back there, which all had to be pulled down. In the 1990s, they were cracking up. There was subsidence below the ground there, and we know exactly why, because this is the spot where Joseph Williamson, in his wisdom, chose to put up a house, or we call it a studio house, for his friend and neighbor and tenant, Cornelius Henderson, who had been a friend of his for some years, the painter and artist. And without telling him what he was doing, Williamson chose to put up a building for Cornelius Henderson to use as an artist studio. And I've explained before, when I did a talk on Cornelius Henderson, how the man just erupted when Williamson showed him this building, and sort of virtually called Williamson a silly old man, because what he put up for him was absolutely no use to a painter, because the lighting was all wrong. I don't know which one of them was worse, Williamson for not asking first, or Cornelius Henderson for being very ungracious. But anyway, it was never used, and I believe it stood well into the beginning of the 20th century before it was finally pulled down and these council houses were put up. But we also know that there was a Williamson quarry on this site before he built this house. So Williamson had put a building up over the top of a quarry. Nothing unusual in that from Williamson's point of view. He did seem to have done that all over the place. His own house was built over a quarry, and various others. The chamber we've just been looking at was built over the top of, dug out before Williamson put houses up on top, and various other places. So that's not unusual, but when they were filling in the ground later, presumably they didn't compact it down well enough, the foundations weren't good enough, and these 3 houses were cracking up, and the people living in them had to be evacuated, and they were torn down, and it's remained as an empty site ever since. And in fact, this tunnel that goes under the road goes right across to about that point there. So it would have joined into this quarry or deep basement that lay below that house that Williamson built on the site. We just go back here to the tunnel plan again. So we've discovered this large chamber, 30 meters long. We've found that passage running right alongside it, leading to the tunnel going under the street. every reason now to believe that these two tunnels branching off in two directions are also going to be there. Well, they may have been destroyed, but they will have been there, even if they're not anymore. They're not make-believe. We were also digging in this area, but we didn't get very far with that because we cut right across the top of the chamber, in actual fact. This is a later conveyancing plan, but a very accurately drawn plan, of course, for conveyancing purposes. Williamson's house here, number 4042, and gardens behind, and number 44 next door to it are the ones that were demolished, and it became the Willys garage site in the 1930s. So that's the site that we now occupy as our headquarters. And then we have number 46, 48, 50, and 52 running along the street right up to the edge of the railway cutting. So this chamber that we've unearthed is right here. I think it's probably partially underneath number 50 and partly underneath number 52, rather than neatly under one building or the other. But I can't be certain of that. Now, a rather interesting little thing happened one day, some years ago, and I don't remember how many. Our ace photographer, Chris Isles, this is one of his photos here, happened to be walking along Mason Street one day. And it was at a time when this little piece of land here, which is just across the road from our site, well, sort of down the road, this is the Merseyflex factory building here, grey and red, and our Williamson's house site is just beyond. And down here on the other side of the street is a piece of railway land. The railway cutting wall runs across here with the bridge over Mason Street, with the railway cutting about 60, 70 or 80 feet below, just beyond that wall. And this little triangle of land next to the railway, where it cuts across the road diagonally, is owned by the Network Rail. And Chris just happened to be walking along the road one day when this site had just been cleared. I think it was at the time when some building may have been demolished, and Network Rail had chosen to fence it off securely, leaving this bit in front empty. If you look at it now, it's an almighty mess, overgrown with trees and shrubs and brambles and all sorts, and endless litter. But as Chris walked along the street, he thought he caught something out of the corner of his eye, and it was this here, a small hole at the edge of the pavement. And he stopped and he thought, I wonder what that is. He moved a stone or a half a brick or something away and cleared it a little bit, and that's what he was left with. And there was actually a void underneath it. Now, Chris usually carries a very large camera around with him, a very expensive camera, but on this occasion, he was carrying a rather small camera. As I say, this was some years ago. Maybe he hadn't graduated to the larger cameras by this time. He managed to put his arm with his camera through this hole and took a series of photos looking inside without having any idea what he was looking at. And this is what he came up with. This is one of the better shots. They were not all as good as this, but this is a small tunnel running along the edge of the street, right below where he was walking, alongside the pavement. And that's looking from the hole where he looked in towards the railway cutting wall, which will be there. It's a little bit misleading because it's only a small tunnel. These look, at first sight, I thought they could look like they could be stone blocks on the side walls, but I think it's just that the camera is quite close to them and it's only a small chamber, that they're actually bricks and a brick arched roof. Rather confusing also because it's half full of water. You're looking here at the water level. There's the water line, and there are reflections, and there are weeds growing in the water, so it causes a rather strange effect. And then, of course, at the other end, it's fairly obvious that a big hole has been punched in the roof, very typical of any Williamson chamber, and all sorts of rubbish has been poured down below just to get rid of it, as they have in every other Williamson tunnel that we've ever discovered. Now, this is that exact spot. This is a Google Earth map showing that spot. This is the railway cutting, of course. Chris was poking his camera in alongside the pavement right here, looking straight along that way. And at the far end, he would have been looking at this piece of railway wall. And of course, on the other side of the railway, this is where our little newly discovered tunnel running across the street runs. The Merseyflex chamber, the large chamber, is under there, but the passage, which is part of the basement, runs along there, and then it becomes a tunnel going under the street to there. And the Army plan shows it forking off in two directions. I would say that there's every likelihood that this is a continuation of this tunnel. And it was one longer tunnel until the railway people constructed this railway cutting and chopped right through it, as they did a little bit further down the road with Williamson's triple-decker tunnel. So it's all looking as if that tunnel, which forks off in two directions on the other side of the road there, was very likely there, and also that this connected into that deep basement or quarry which Williamson had excavated out before building that house for Cornelius Henderson. Now, what I'm working towards is the fact that we haven't been idle, even though we haven't been able to dig. We've puzzled over these plans for so many years. We've gradually managed to prove that various bits of it are for real, and so we have every reason to think that other parts will be real as well. The puzzle at the moment, which is giving us a lot of head scratching, is there actually a passage here, turning 90 degrees and going this way, and then turning at another angle and going across the Merseyflex site and right across our Williamson house site, and then onto the magnet site and joining up with other chambers on there? We've not seen any evidence of this one. And a plan like this doesn't give you any indication of whether it might be just below surface level or whether it might be a deep tunnel way below ground. And in fact, we don't know how deep this big chamber is that we found. We're struggling to try and decide what was the line that this passage or tunnel would have taken, because different versions of the plan seem to, when you take measurements, they seem to give different readings, different impressions of where this particular passage or tunnel will reach on our land. So one version of it, this one in particular, shows the banqueting hall there. This won't be easy for you to see, but it shows the gash, the narrow passage that we use to get down to the banqueting hall from the sandstone chamber, which lies here. And it seems to show this passage running right across both sites and joining into the back of our sandstone chamber. Now, we know there isn't any sign of it there, but we thought it might be worthwhile investigating. So I'll just show you what the sandstone chamber looks like. This is how we get down into it now that we've opened things up. We don't have to come down a long ladder through a patch in the ground up there. We've got a nice set of steel stairs that go down into the sandstone chamber. And this is rather intriguing. This sandstone wall on the left-hand side as you go down has always puzzled us ever since we've known about it. There we're looking from partway down the stairs into the sandstone chamber. And as you can see, it's a beautifully constructed piece of sandstone work. It's a real marvel, really. All these stones are wedge-shaped, nicely finished with a pattern on the end. They all fit together absolutely beautifully. It's only about 20-odd feet long, and it doesn't serve any purpose as far as we can tell, but it's a lovely bit of work. Stones concave nicely on the inside edges, no mortar needed. Absolutely beautiful. It's a real masterpiece. And at the other end of it, you have a smaller brick arch, which obviously led on to somewhere. We drew a blank when we managed to have a dig on the magnet site next door. We dug a trench right across behind there, and we found there was nothing left at all. Wherever it had led to, whatever it connected into, has been destroyed years ago. So no clues as to where that goes. But the thing we're interested in at this minute is this wall, looking back towards the wall where we came down. This sandstone wall here has always puzzled us because it's a very rough and ready, ordinary looking sandstone wall. Nothing at all like the beautiful construction of the sandstone chamber arch. So does it predate Williamson, or was it built after? And why is it so different from the rest? We thought it would be important enough, in case this passage coming across both sites does land at this point, that sometime, and I'm not quite sure when, but probably sometime in 2019, we decided to have a dig in the middle of our patch on the other side of that wall. Now, the sandstone chamber is under there, like that. There's the end wall of it. And all this material has come out of our excavation. We did actually go an awful lot deeper than this because we wanted to, I mean, the sandstone chamber lies about 18 feet below this ground level. We couldn't get that deep safely, but we went down a good bit deeper than this before we felt it was too dangerous, and we stopped and started to fill it in again. So at this point, I think we've been filling in. And we didn't find anything of significance at all, just that wall, and there didn't appear to be anything leading into it coming across the site, unfortunately. So we drew a blank, which is not the first time that's happened, but you have to investigate. Maybe you have to eliminate things, gives you other ideas to look in other directions. Now, this is a plan that I drew when we were searching, when we just discovered the Merseyflex chamber. The green rectangle here is that Merseyflex chamber. The little red mark there is our entry hole. 2 more holes in the roof there where they bust holes through just to pour the material down. We have accurate measurements here of the size and shape of this and the exact positioning of this chamber. And one of the most important things we want to do now, and we're hoping it's going to happen sometime soon, we are about to commission a borehole survey, because we want to try and find that passage that runs across the sites, if it's there, if it still exists, and find out where it leads to. But we have the accurate measurements for the chamber, and so we can work out where the passages run or ran across the sites. Now, to my mind, the single most important thing, even if we only had one borehole put down, would be to put a borehole right down through the middle of the roof of this chamber somewhere, because we need to know how deep it is. There's every indication from the shape and size of the arch of this roof in stone blocks and bricks that it's going to be a deep one. Now, is it as deep as the banqueting hall we have on our site at 30 feet below ground, or is it 40 or 50 or even 60 feet below ground? I believe it must be fairly substantial for the railway people to have bothered to use it as a dumping ground for their waste material when they were constructing the railway cutting. I don't think they would have bothered if it was just a shallow chamber, but we would like to know. And the idea is to put a borehole down through there, all the way down to the bedrock, just to prove what depth it actually is. So that would be our starter for 10. And then hopefully, if we can take some reasonably accurate measurements from the Army plans to see how far back this passage goes before it does a turn, and maybe to drill a series of boreholes in a straight line across here. And if we find it, then another series of boreholes across here, and see if we can pick up the exact line that this passage takes where it goes across both sites. And then maybe we'll have somewhere new to dig. So it's something that's going to be quite pricey. We may spend several £1,000s on this, and it could be a couple of days' work. It might draw a complete blank, but we would hope that at least we will find out the depth of that major chamber. And that would be a very interesting thing, because obviously we want to try and get permission from Liverpool City Council to occupy this piece of land, at least part of it, so that we can open up this chamber and excavate it and take out all of that waste material and see just how big it is. But of course, finding this passage and the line that it takes as well would be also very interesting and worthwhile. So basically, that's where we're up to. We have been working very hard on things like that, and other things have been occupying our minds, trying to make sense of what Williamson did and how he did it, of course, for years and years. But this is one thing that's imminently in the pipeline, and I just wanted to get that across, just to let people know, even though there's no digging going on, we have places where we want to dig on all 3 sites, and places we could empty, like the triple-decker tunnel down here, and still searching for the great tunnel under there. And there's lots more to be done when we can get our hands on it. So that's all I've got about to say on that subject. But hopefully in the very near future, might be able to announce at one of our monthly members meetings that we have had some success with this, and maybe moving on to new things, and it might be getting more exciting again. So that's it. I hope you found that interesting. So thank you very much for watching and listening. I'll try and be back with another talk sometime in the near future, if I can think of something else to talk about.